Moses' final words to God's chosen people are to choose life, the life that God was offering to them. That indeed would be the only way that they would find peace and fulfillment, blessing in the promised land, the promised future that God had in store for them. Moses' words pronounced blessing, but it came with a warning. To disobey God was to choose death and curse. God's laws, if followed, offered protection to them, but if ignored, they would be living outside of God's protection and blessing, and things would fall apart for them in every way and at every level of their existence. The Old Testament is filled with narratives of things falling apart, and occasionally things coming into their rightful place, and it's all based on the choices that people made in their lives, whether they move toward life or they move toward death. We speak of life or death decisions, but truly they are rare. Right? No, not right. They're frequent. They're part of our experience day by day. Maybe not life and death decisions like this is the moment of my death, but the death of things around us. Our choices either are life-giving or life-hampering, because in the end, all of the life-hampering decisions birth some sort of death. Death of relationships, death of trust, death of our own identity, who we are as God's beloved, death of faithfulness to God. And God calls out to us, choose life. Fast forward to the lectionary gospel passage for today, and Jesus takes up that message again, choose life. This section of "you have heard it said, but I say," is often referred to as the antitheses. But that's not really the picture or intent of what Jesus is doing here. Because Jesus does not say, "You've heard it said to kill, but I say, okay, it's permissible to kill." That would be a true antithesis. No, Jesus goes deeper. Do not kill. That part is right. But don't even use words or name-calling that diminish another. That, he declares, is the same as murder. And it's not enough to keep oneself from committing adultery. Even our thoughts must be pure. No, these are not antitheses, but these are expansions of what true obedience looks like. You have heard it said that your witness to the world is what shows on the outside, but Jesus says, oh no, it's also the thoughts that count. In last week's gospel lesson, we heard Jesus say that our righteousness must surpass that of the Pharisees and scribes. And that is not an easy goal. We too often demonize the Pharisees and scribes and think of them as an unholy lot. But they were obedient to God's laws. They were the obedience of God's laws personified. They were in worship regularly, religiously. They tithed. They studied the scripture. They prayed. They ordered their lives completely around God. Their outward witness was one of committed faithfulness. How can you exceed that? But here Jesus is not adding to the outward display of obedience. His words move us inward. The inner motivations, the heart of the matter. It's not just avoidance of overt sin. It's a change that redeems our thoughts, the thoughts that drive our actions. And then deeper still, it's the heart that drives our thoughts. And it's allowing God to shape our hearts to be more and more like the heart of Jesus. How deep is our faith in God? How deep is our love for God? That cannot be measured simply from external behaviors. It's actually the heart of the matter. Jesus has said he didn't come to abolish the law that we heard last week, but to fulfill the law. And fulfill it he did. His obedience was not only external, but all the way in. There was complete integrity and complete wholeness to his life and his sacrificial death for our sakes. His heart was pierced for us. It was complete love and complete obedience. If we focus only on the outward expressions of obedience to God, we can easily, like the Pharisees did so often, become legalistic and ignore God's deeper invitation to what it means to have life abundantly. Elsewhere, Jesus, in his frustration with outward displays only, tells the Pharisees and scribes that they're like whitewashed tombs. They're dead on the inside, dead where it counts. And lest we judge them too harshly, we have to look at ourselves. And especially as we're entering Lent soon, it makes a fitting time to examine the depth of our love for God and for others. It's time for a heart checkup. The love of God flowed from the heart of Christ without any barriers. What impedes our love? Love that is truly life-giving to us and to others. I have preached on this passage before, not happily, but I've preached on it. We just, whatever comes up, your name comes up. It's a hard one to preach about. I have preached on it before. I've heard it preached on many times. And usually people either go through the list, anger and words, adultery, lust, divorce, and oath-keeping, integrity of words. And in all of these, we have found ways to obey in limited external ways. I don't think Jesus is speaking of these few as the worst sins out there or vices, but examples of how we constrain obedience by anger in all of its forms, not just killing, not just murder, by greed, by lack of concern or respect for others, by using our words to hurt or deceive. Or, the other way I've heard this preached, is that the gouging of eyes and the cutting off of hands are preached as hyperboles with the warning, don't try this at home, folks. Because they're so extreme that sometimes we don't know what to do with those. But I'd like to look at that section today for a bit and from a different perspective. How valuable is the choice of life? That's the question that I see there. We dare not just discount the words of Jesus there because we know he doesn't mean literal gouging or amputation. Jesus is saying that choosing life is so precious that sacrifices pale in comparison. It's odd timing for me to have this passage. Many of you know that I'm diabetic, and my recent surgery to have a skin graft over my cochlear implant magnet was necessitated because of that thinning diabetic skin. Diabetes also runs in my family, and just over a week ago, one of my brothers had to have part of his toe taken off because if you're diabetic and you get an infection, it heals so slowly, and especially on the extremities, that it can spread. It can spread like a cancer. And so sometimes doctors make a very hard decision that this will become life-threatening, and life is so valuable that you need to make the sacrifice of that body part. Another one of our dear members here has a family member who just lost an eye to diabetes as well. And again, those are not easy decisions for a doctor to make, but life is so valuable that it's worth it. And that's what Jesus, I think, was saying is our understanding of spiritual life so valuable that we would make a sacrifice that seems like a very, very difficult cutting of self. Doctors are not quick to do that, and we're glad of that. They weigh the spread of infection with the loss of a body part carefully, and only when there is no other way found do they take the step of cutting away. Because you see, choosing life is not always an easy choice. Not physically with our bodies, but not spiritually as well. Maybe you remember in 2003, the story that was on the news often about a young man in Utah who decided to go to the Canyonlands and to alone do rock climbing and rappelling and going through the gorges and canyons. As he was going into a crevice, a large boulder broke loose and landed on his hand and arm. And he was trapped deep in this crevice, trapped where no one could see him and no one would be coming by to see him, trapped where there was no phone service, there was no bars on his phone so he could call someone, trapped where his voice could not be heard. He was trapped there with a boulder on his arm. And for 127 hours, he was there wondering what he should do. 127 hours with a small water bottle, small for that long at least, and a couple of granola bars because he had planned a day-long trip and to be home. Nobody knew he was there. He made the agonizing choice of cutting off his arm. He didn't have his Swiss pocket knife with him. What he had was, he said, one that his mother had, a cheap one his mother had used as a stocking stuffer that was very dull. But he sawed off his arm and hand in order to be able to leave that place and live, because as he was there, he thought, I would like to marry, I would like to have children, I would like to live life. And so he cut off what he could not save in order to live. I think Jesus is telling us here that cutting off what is bad for us is really the only way to live. It's the only way to live without just external display of Christianity. It's the only way to live with a heart that is filled with God's power and love, and out of that flows out to others. One commentator has written this: our job as preachers is to embrace, share, and encourage the vision for more when life around us cries out constantly, good enough. Is our Christianity like that? Are we living a good enough, secure, comfortable faith when God has something much more for us? In American Christianity, it feels like we embrace a cult of comfort. And comfort says, do not cut off anything. Or as Dallas Willard wrote, our Christian experiences is about a mile wide and a quarter of an inch deep. Perhaps the Sermon on the Mount begins with blessings to odd groups of people. The poor in spirit, are they really blessed? The mourning, because they have less weighing them down And perhaps when you have those kinds of situations where you see that you have less, then you don't have a boulder on your arm holding you in one place against choosing what really is life. Those things that protect our security, our wealth, our prestige, our power, our control, that becomes who we are. We become entrapped by them. And the dangers of living with affluence and influence is that it's harder to cut off those things, even though they bring only a false sense of well-being and comfort. It's not long before we begin Lent. Ash Wednesday is February 22nd. We'll meet here. We will remember our mortality. We will remember with ashes on our foreheads that it isn't forever, and that the choices we have to make in life have to be made now. We can't delay. Can we enter that and walk with Jesus to the cross, where we see him holding back nothing, where we see him sacrificing everything of this world, where we see his love that knows no bounds, as he chooses life for us by his death? Do we dare choose life regardless of the cost? Do you? Do I? Lord, give us the courage to move toward life and cut off anything that gets in our way of pursuing God.